Chapter 1. The Ferry Sets Sail. The Crooked Ferry, a sturdy but weathered vessel, bobbed gently at the Dover dock under a sky bruised with twilight clouds. Its name, painted in peeling gold letters along the hull, seemed an odd choice for a ship, meant to inspire confidence in its passengers crossing the English Channel to Calais. Hercule Poirot, immaculate in his pinstriped suit and polished shoes, adjusted his Homburg hat and surveyed the scene with keen green eyes. The little Belgian detective, known for his fastidious nature and unparalleled intellect, had chosen this unassuming ferry for a brief respite from London's clamorous decision. He would soon question, mon Dieu, the English and their quaint names. Poirot murmured to himself, stroking his meticulously waxed moustache. This crooked ferry, it does not inspire the confidence, n'est-ce pas? Yet, it is the journey, not the name, that matters. He stepped onto the gangplank, his cane tapping lightly, and observed the other passengers ascending with varying degrees of enthusiasm. There were not many, perhaps a dozen in total, a small but eclectic group that piqued Poirot's curiosity. His mind, ever active, began to catalogue them as pieces in a puzzle not yet formed. First, there was Mrs. Eleanor Vance, a widow of considerable wealth, her fur stole draped elegantly despite the mild September air. Her sharp blue eyes darted about, as if expecting an ambush, and she clutched a velvet reticule with a grip that suggested it held more than mere trinkets. Beside her, a young woman, Miss Clara Beaumont, her companion, walked with a nervous energy, her auburn curls bouncing as she whispered urgently to Mrs. Vance, "Really, Eleanor, must we take this dreadful ferry?" Clara's voice carried a petulant edge. "It looks as though it might sink before we reach France." "Hush, Clara," Mrs. Vance replied sharply. "It's only a few hours, and I've business in Calais that cannot wait." Poirot's lips twitched in a faint smile. Business, he thought. The word so often conceals the most interesting of secrets. Next, he noted Mr. Leonard Grayson, a brash American businessman whose loud laughter echoed across the deck. His pinstriped suit rivaled Poirot's in cut, though it lacked the detective's refined elegance. Grayson was deep in conversation with a wiry, bespectacled man, Dr. Hugo Platt, a physician whose nervous habit of adjusting his glasses betrayed a certain unease. "Say, Doc, you ever been on a boat like this?" Grayson boomed, slapping Platt's shoulder. "Feels like we're in for an adventure." Dr. Platt managed a weak smile. "I prefer dry land, Mr. Grayson. Boats, they unsettle me." Poirot's gaze shifted to a solitary figure leaning against the railing, a tall, gaunt man with a hawkish face, introduced by the steward as Mr. Victor Klein. His dark overcoat and fedora gave him the air of a man who preferred shadows to light. He lit a cigarette, the flare of the match briefly illuminating his sharp features, and stared out at the darkening sea. The final passengers of note included a young couple, Mr. and Mrs. Philip Marlowe, newlyweds whose affectionate glances contrasted with their oddly formal demeanor, and a quiet, elderly Frenchman, Monsieur Dubois, who clutched a worn leather satchel and avoided eye contact as the ferry's whistle blew, signaling departure. Poirot settled into a deck chair, his gloved hands folded neatly over his cane. The ship groaned as it pulled away from the dock, the lights of Dover fading into the mist. The passengers dispersed to their cabins or lingered on deck, their voices mingling with the hum of the engines and the slap of waves against the hull. Poirot's orderly mind, however, was already at work. "C'est curieux," he mused, "many strangers, yet already I sense the undercurrents, the widow's anxiety, the doctor's unease, the solitary man's secrecy. There is a story here, and Hercule Poirot shall uncover it." He closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to listen to the rhythm of the ship, the murmurs of conversation, and the faint creak of the crooked ferry as it carved its path through the night. Little did he know that before dawn, that rhythm would be shattered by a scream that would set his little grey cells ablaze. Chapter 1 leaves us with more questions than answers. While we search for clues, tell me, where are you tuning in from? Drop your location below, and subscribe now to stay with us until the final reveal. Chapter 2. A Scream in the Night. The crooked ferry ploughed steadily through the dark waters of the English Channel, its engines a low rhythmic thrum beneath the sigh of the sea. Hercule Poirot, seated in the small but elegantly appointed passenger lounge, sipped a tisane, his eyes half closed but his mind alert. The room, lit by dim brass lamps, cast flickering shadows over the polished wood paneling. Most passengers had retired to their cabins, but Poirot, ever observant, preferred the quiet of the lounge to gather his thoughts about the curious company aboard. The clock above the bar ticked toward midnight when a piercing scream shattered the calm. It was a sound of raw terror, high and sharp, echoing from the corridor beyond the lounge. Poirot's cup paused at his lips, his green eyes snapping open. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, setting the cup down with deliberate care. "That is not the cry of a mere nightmare." He rose, cane in hand, and moved swiftly toward the source of the sound. The lounge door swung open, revealing a steward, young and pale, frozen in the corridor. "Monsieur Poirot," the steward stammered. It came from cabin 6. "Led the way," Viti Poirot commanded, his voice calm but firm. As they hurried down the narrow corridor, doors creaked open, and sleepy, anxious faces peered out. Mrs. Eleanor Vance, her fur stole askew, clutched Clara Beaumont's arm. "What's happened?" she demanded, her voice trembling. Clara's eyes were wide, her auburn curls disheveled, as if she'd been roused from sleep. Mr. Leonard Grayson emerged next, his brash demeanor subdued, his tie loosened. "Somebody hurt," he called, pushing past Dr. Hugo Platt, who fumbled with his glasses, muttering, "Good heavens, what now?" The steward stopped at cabin 6, its door slightly ajar. Poirot held up a hand, signaling silence, and pushed the door open with his cane. The cabin was small, lit by a single lamp that cast harsh shadows. On the narrow bed lay Mr. Victor Klein, the gaunt man Poirot had noted earlier. His dark overcoat was still on, but his fedora lay crumpled on the floor. His eyes stared blankly at the ceiling, and a thin trickle of blood ran from a wound at his temple, pooling on the pillow. "Soccer blue," Poirot whispered, stepping closer. He bent over the body, his gloved fingers hovering but not touching. "This man is dead, murdered, I fear." The steward gasped, and a murmur rippled through the gathering passengers. Clara Beaumont stifled a sob, while Mrs. Vance's grip on her companion tightened. Grayson let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. "Right under our noses." Dr. Platt pushed forward, his professional instincts overriding his nerves. "Let me see," he said, adjusting his glasses. He knelt beside the body, checking for a pulse, though the result was clear. "He's gone. A blow to the head, I'd wager. Something heavy, precise." Poirot's eyes scanned the cabin, noting the locked porthole, the undisturbed luggage, and a faint smudge of mud on the floor near the door. "The door," he said sharply. "It was locked when you heard the scream, Nan." The steward nodded. "Yes, sir. I had to use my key to check after the scream." Poirot mused, his mustache twitching. He turned to the gathered passengers, his gaze piercing. "Who among you was near this cabin before the scream? Speak, if you please." Silence hung heavy, broken only by the creak of the ferry. Finally, Monsieur Dubois, the elderly Frenchman with the leather satchel, spoke in a quavering voice. "I passed by, perhaps 10 minutes ago. I heard nothing unusual. And you, Madame Vance?" Poirot's eyes fixed on the widow, whose face paled. "I was in my cabin," she said quickly. "Clara and I were preparing for bed." Clara nodded vigorously. "It's true, we heard nothing until the scream." Poirot's gaze lingered, then shifted to the others. "Very well. No one must leave this corridor until I have spoken with the captain. This is now a matter of murder, and Hercule Poirot does not permit the truth to slip away." As the passengers exchanged uneasy glances, the ferry rocked gently, its crooked path through the night now shadowed by death. Poirot's little grey cells were already at work, piecing together the fragments of a puzzle that promised to be as intricate as the sea itself. Chapter 3. The locked door. The air in cabin 6 was thick with the metallic temps of blood, and the faint salt of the sea seeping through the sealed porthole. Hercule Poirot stood at the center of the small space, his gloved hands clasped behind his back, his green eyes darting from the lifeless form of Mr. Victor Klein to the minute details of the cabin. The passengers, huddled just outside the door, whispered nervously, their faces a gallery of fear, curiosity, and suspicion. The steward, still pale, stood guard at Poirot's request, ensuring no one entered or left. "Alors," Poirot said softly, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "We have a murder, and a puzzle most intriguing. A man is struck down in a locked cabin, yet the killer has vanished like the mist. Mais Nan, The truth is never so elusive to Hercule Poirot. He knelt beside the body, examining the wound at Klein's temple. The blow was clean, a single strike, delivered with force. "Dr. Platt," Poirot called, not looking up. "You confirm this wound as the cause of death?" Dr. Hugo Platt, hovering near the doorway, adjusted his glasses nervously. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot. A heavy blow, likely with a blunt object. Death would have been instantaneous." Poirot nodded, his gaze shifting to the floor. The smudge of mud he had noticed earlier was faint but distinct, a trail leading from the door to the bed. He traced it with his cane, careful not to disturb it. "This mud," he mused. "It is not from the deck, which is swept clean. Curio, where has our killer walked before entering?" He turned his attention to the cabin's contents. Klein's luggage, a single leather valise, sat unopened in the corner. A silver cigarette case lay on the bedside table, its lid ajar, revealing a half-dozen cigarettes. Poirot picked it up, noting a faint engraving on the inside, "VK from EV 1929 Interesant," he murmured. "A gift, perhaps, from someone close." The porthole was locked, its latch rusted from disuse. The door, the steward had confirmed, was locked from the inside when the scream was heard. Poirot tapped the doorframe thoughtfully. "A locked room," he said aloud. "The favorite playground of the murderer who wishes to confound." But Poirot is not so easily confounded. He stepped into the corridor, where the passengers waited under the dim glow of the ship's lamps. Mrs. Eleanor Vance stood rigid, her eyes avoiding the cabin. Clara Beaumont clung to her, whispering, "Eleanor, this is dreadful. We must demand." The captain turned back. "Nonsense," Mrs. Vance snapped, though her voice wavered. "We're halfway to Calais. There's no turning back now." Mr. Leonard Grayson leaned against the wall, his earlier bravado replaced by a grim expression. "Some kind of locked room trick." "Huh, Mr. Poirot. I read about cases like that in detective magazines." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Magazines, Monsieur Grayson, lack the order and method of the little grey cells. Tell me, where were you when the scream was heard?" Grayson shrugged. "In the lounge, having a nightcap. Alone, I'm afraid. Nobody to vouch for me." "And you, Monsieur Dubois?" Poirot turned to the elderly Frenchman, who clutched his satchel tighter. "I was in my cabin, reading," Dubois said, his accent thick. "I heard the scream, but I thought it was a woman, perhaps." Startled, Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And you, Madame Vance, you and Mademoiselle Beaumont were together?" Yes," Mrs. Vance said firmly. "We were in our cabin, as I said. We heard nothing until that awful scream." Clara nodded, but her eyes flickered toward the floor, avoiding Poirot's gaze. The detective noted this, filing it away in his meticulous mind. He turned to the young couple, Mr. and Mrs. Philip Marlowe, who stood close together, their faces pale. "And you, Monsieur and Madame Marlowe?" "We were on deck," Philip Marlowe said, his voice steady but his hand tightening on his wife's. "We wanted some air. We heard the scream and came running." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "Very well. I shall speak with the captain presently. No one is to enter this cabin, and no one is to leave the ferry until we reach Calais. The truth, it hides among you, and Hercule Poirot will find it." As the passengers dispersed, their whispers trailing like smoke, Poirot returned to the cabin, his mind racing. The mud, the cigarette case, the locked door, each was a thread in a tapestry of deception. And somewhere, among the nervous glances and hurried alibis, lay the key to unraveling the death on the crooked ferry. Chapter 4. The Captain's Tale. The crooked ferry's wheelhouse was a cramped utilitarian space, smelling of polished brass and engine oil. Hercule Poirot stood before Captain Amos Reddick, a grizzled man with a weathered face and eyes that seemed to carry the weight of countless voyages. The captain leaned against the ship's wheel, the dim light of a lantern casting shadows across his furrowed brow. Outside, the sea churned restlessly, the horizon swallowed by the night. "Monsieur le Capitaine," Poirot began, his voice precise. "A man lies dead in cabin 6, struck down in a locked room. I require your assistance to understand this ferry and its passengers. Tell me, what is the history of this crooked ferry?" Reddick rubbed his jaw, his calloused fingers rasping against stubble. "A murder, you say? God help us. This old girl's seen her share of troubles, but nothing like this." He gestured vaguely at the wheelhouse. "The crooked ferry's been running the Dover-Calais route for nigh on 20 years, named for the way she lists a bit to starboard. Nothing dangerous, mind, just her character." Poirot's moustache twitched character we, but perhaps also secrets. Have there been incidents before? Strange events, passengers who caused trouble? The captain hesitated, his eyes flickering to the sea, before returning to Poirot. Well, now there was a theft, some years back. A lady's necklace went missing. Valuable thing. Never found it, nor the thief. Caused a right stir among the passengers. And then, 29 or 30, a man went overboard one night. Accident, they called it, but some whispered it was deliberate. No proof though. Interessant, Poirot murmured, his gloved fingers tapping his cane. This man who went overboard, what was his name? Reddick frowned, searching his memory. Can't recall exactly. Something foreign, I think. Klein, maybe. No, Klein. Victor Klein. That was it. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Raymond, the same name as our victim. A coincidence, perhaps, but Hercule Poirot does not trust coincidences. Tell me, Captain, do you know of any connection between this earlier Klein and the man now dead? Reddick shook his head. Never saw this fellow before tonight. But the name's uncommon enough to stick in the mind. Could be no relation at all. Perhaps, Poirot said, though his tone suggested skepticism. And the crew, they are trustworthy. No one with a grudge. A secret. My crew's solid, Reddick said firmly. 4 of us, including me. There's young Tom, the steward you met, and 2 deckhands, Jenkins and Marsh. Been with me years. They're shaken up, same as me. Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing the details. One more thing, Captain, the mud I observed in cabin 6 is not from the deck. Is there a place on this ferry where such mud might be found? A storage area, perhaps, or a lower deck? Reddick's brow furrowed. Mud. The decks are kept clean, but there's the engine room, down below. Gets mucky sometimes, what with oil and dirt from the coal stores. Passengers don't go there though, it's crew only. Mercy, Captain, Poirot said, inclining his head. You have been most helpful. I shall return if I have further questions. For now, ensure no one disturbs cabin 6. As Poirot descended from the wheelhouse, the ferry rocked gently, the creak of its timbers a mournful sound. He paused on the deck, gazing at the dark waves. The name Victor Klein, twice linked to this ferry, was no mere happenstance. Was the victim the same man from years ago, or another bearing his name? And the mud, how had it travelled from the engine room to a locked cabin? He glanced toward the passenger lounge, where a faint light glowed. Voices drifted through the night, Mrs. Eleanor Vance's sharp tones, Clara Beaumont's nervous replies, and the low rumble of Leonard Gray's American drawl. Each passenger, Poirot knew, held a piece of the puzzle. The crooked ferry, with its tilted path and shadowed history, was a stage for deception, and Poirot's little grey cells were already weaving the threads of truth. Chapter 5. Suspects and Secrets. The passenger lounge of the crooked ferry was a cocoon of warmth against the chill of the Channel night, its brass lamps casting a golden glow over the mahogany panelling. Hercule Poirot sat at a small table, a notebook open before him, his fountain pen poised as he methodically listed the passengers aboard. The murder of Victor Klein in a locked cabin demanded order and method, and Poirot's little grey cells were now fully engaged, sifting through the web of human motives and secrets. A lore, he murmured. To find the killer, one must first know the players. Each passenger, they carry a story, and in one of these stories lies the truth. He began with Mrs. Eleanor Vance, the wealthy widow whose sharp eyes and tighter grip on her reticule hinted at hidden anxieties. Her companion, Miss Clara Beaumont, seemed loyal yet nervous, her quick glances betraying unease beyond the shock of murder. Poirot recalled a cigarette case in Klein's cabin, engraved VK from EV 1929. Could EV be Eleanor Vance? The initials matched, and the date aligned with the captain's tale of a Victor Klein lost overboard years ago. A connection, perhaps, but one requiring proof. Next, he noted Mr. Leonard Grayson, the boisterous American businessman. His loud demeanor masked a calculating mind. Poirot suspected Grayson had been alone in the lounge at the time of the scream, with no alibi. His familiarity with detective magazines suggested a mind intrigued by crime, perhaps to intrigued Dr. Hugo Platt. The nervous physician was another enigma. His professional calm had faltered under pressure, and his quick assessment of Klein's wound showed knowledge of violence. Could a doctor, sworn to preserve life, have a motive to end one? Poirot's pen lingered over Platt's name, circling it lightly. Monsieur Dubois, the elderly Frenchman with the worn satchel, had admitted to passing cabin 6 before the scream. His reticence and guarded manner suggested he carried more than just papers in that satchel. Was it fear or guilt that kept his eyes averted? The young newlyweds, Mr. and Mrs. Philip Marlowe, presented a different puzzle. Their affection seemed genuine, yet their formal demeanor hinted at restraint. On deck during the scream, they had no one to confirm their whereabouts. Poirot wondered if their honeymoon was a facade for a darker purpose. As he wrote, the lounge door creaked open, admitting Clara Beaumont. Her auburn curls were pinned hastily, and her hands twisted in her skirt. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice low, I couldn't sleep. This dreadful business is too much." Poirot gestured to a chair. "Sit, mademoiselle. You are troubled. Perhaps you wish to share something with Hercule Poirot." Clara hesitated, glancing at the door. "It's Mrs. Vance. She's not herself. She knew Mr. Klein, I'm sure of it. I saw them talking earlier, on deck, before we sailed. It wasn't friendly." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Raymond. And what was the nature of this conversation?" "I couldn't hear much," Clara admitted, "but she called him a ghost from the past. He laughed, but it was cold. Then she walked away, furious." "Merci, Mademoiselle," Poirot said, his tone gentle but probing. "And you, did you know this Victor Klein?" Clara's cheeks flushed. "No, I'd seen him before, in London, at a party Mrs. Vance hosted. He was unsettling, always watching, never speaking much." Poirot nodded, dismissing her gently. "Return to your cabin, mademoiselle, and say nothing of this to others. See, vous plot." As Clara left, Poirot added her observation to his notes. A connection between Mrs. Vance and Klein, confirmed by Clara's nervous confession, strengthened his suspicion of the widow. The initials EV loomed larger in his mind. Yet, the mud in the cabin, the locked door, and the captain's tale of a past Klein suggested layers of deception. He closed his notebook, his mustache twitching. "The net tightens," he said softly. "Each secret is a thread, and soon Hercule Poirot will weave them into the truth." Outside, the ferry's engines droned on, carrying its passengers and its killer toward Calais. The lounge grew quiet, but the air was heavy with unspoken truths, waiting for Poirot's keen mind to unravel them. Chapter 6. The missing jewel. The crooked ferry swayed gently as it carved its path through the dark Channel waters. The distant hum of its engines, a constant reminder of its relentless journey toward Calais. Hercule Poirot stood once more in cabin 6, the scene of Victor Klein's murder, his gloved hands clasped behind his back. The body had been covered with the sheet, at Dr. Platt's insistence, but the air still carried the faint metallic tang of blood. The steward, Tom, hovered nervously at the door, under strict orders to admit no one but Poirot. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, his green eyes scanning the cabin anew. The locked door, the mud, the cigarette case, each tells a story. But now, Pater, there is another chapter to uncover. He knelt beside Klein's valise, which he had not yet examined closely. With careful precision, he unlatched it, revealing neatly folded clothes, a few papers, and a small velvet pouch tucked into a side pocket. Poirot opened the pouch, expecting perhaps a watch or a trinket, but found it empty. A faint indentation in the velvet suggested it had once held something round and substantial, a jewel, perhaps, or a large stone interescent, Poirot said, holding the pouch to the light. "An empty case for something valuable. Where is this treasure now, I wonder?" He rose and turned to the steward. "Monsieur Tom, tell me, did you see Mr. Klein with any jewelry, a ring, a brooch, perhaps a gemstone when he boarded?" Tom shook his head, his youthful face pale. "No, sir. He kept to himself, carried that valise and his overcoat. Didn't flash anything fancy, not like Mrs. Vance with her pearls." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Mrs. Vance, her name returns like a refrain. Merci, Tom, you may go, but remain close." As the steward retreated, Poirot's mind raced. The empty pouch suggested a motive beyond personal vendetta. Had Klein been carrying a jewel, and had his killer taken it? The initials EV on the cigarette case, possibly linking to Eleanor Vance, now took on new significance. Was the widow's wealth tied to this missing item? He stepped into the corridor, where the passengers had gathered earlier, and made his way to the lounge. There, he found Mrs. Eleanor Vance, seated stiffly, her fur stole draped over her shoulders, her reticule clutched tightly. Clara Beaumont sat beside her, her eyes red-rimmed, while Leonard Grayson stood at the bar, nursing a whiskey. Dr. Platt and Monsieur Dubois were absent, and the Marlowes, the newlyweds, whispered quietly in a corner. Madame, Vance Poirot said, approaching with a polite bow, "A word, if you please. In Mr. Klein's cabin, I found evidence of a missing item, a jewel, perhaps, of great value. You knew him, Nest Cepa. Did he speak of such a thing?" Mrs. Vance's face tightened, her lips a thin line. "I told you, Monsieur Poirot, I barely knew the man. A passing acquaintance from years ago, nothing more. Jewels. I know nothing of that." Clara glanced at her employer, then quickly away, her fingers twisting in her lap. Poirot noted the gesture, his eyes narrowing. "And yet, Mademoiselle Beaumont saw you argue with him on deck. A ghost from the past, she called him. Ghosts, madame, often carry treasures or curses." Mrs. Vance's eyes flashed. "Clara speaks out of turn. It was a trivial disagreement, nothing more. I have no interest in jewels, Monsieur Poirot, except those I wear." Grayson, overhearing, let out a chuckle. "Sounds like a tall tale, ma'am. Klein didn't strike me as the type to carry baubles, but then, he was a shifty sort. Maybe he swiped something from you, eh?" "Mind your tongue, Mr. Grayson," Mrs. Vance snapped, rising. "I won't be accused by a loud-mouthed American with no manners." Poirot raised a hand, calming the tension. "Essays, we are all weary, but the truth requires patience. Madame, if you recall anything at all, you will tell Poirot." "We." She nodded curtly and swept from the lounge, Clara trailing behind. Grayson shrugged, downing his drink. "Touchy, ain't she? Bet she's hiding something." Poirot did not reply, but his mind was alight. The missing jewel, the initials, the mud from the engine room, all pointed to a motive tangled in greed, or revenge. As the ferry pressed on through the night, the weight of the mystery grew heavier, and Poirot knew the next clue would bring him closer to the killer's shadow. Chapter 7. Whispers on deck. The deck of the crooked ferry was shrouded in mist, the air heavy with the salt of the channel and the faint chill of the approaching dawn. Hercule Poirot stood near the railing, his overcoat buttoned against the breeze, his keen ears attuned to the soft murmur of voices carried by the wind. The passengers, restless after the shock of Victor Klein's murder, had begun to emerge from their cabins, seeking solace or secrets in the open air. Poirot, ever the observer, had chosen this spot to listen, for the night often loosened tongues that daylight held fast. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, adjusting his Homburg hat. "The deck is a stage, and the players, they speak when they think. No one hears but Hercule Poirot. He hears all." Near the stern, partially obscured by a lifeboat, Poirot caught the low, urgent tones of Mrs. Eleanor Vance and her companion, Clara Beaumont. He edged closer, careful to remain unseen behind. "A stack of coiled ropes. You mustn't speak of it, Clara," Mrs. Vance hissed, her voice taut with strain. "Not a word, do you hear? If anyone learns what we discussed with him, it could ruin everything." "But, Eleanor," Clara whispered, her voice trembling, "he's dead now. Surely it doesn't matter." "It matters more than ever," Mrs. Vance cut in. "Keep your mouth shut, girl, or you'll regret it." Poirot's mustache twitched as he noted the exchange. What secret binds these two, he wondered. The widow's fear suggested a connection to Klein deeper than she admitted, and Clara's nervousness hinted at complicity or coercion. Before he could ponder further, another conversation reached his ears, this time from the opposite side of the deck. Leonard Grayson's booming voice, though lowered, was unmistakable, mingling with the quieter, clipped tones of Dr. Hugo Platt. "Look, Doc," Grayson said, "I don't care what you saw in London. You keep that to yourself, understand? We've got enough trouble with this murder." Dr. Platt's reply was barely audible, but Poirot caught the words. "Didn't mean to Klein, dangerous man. Dangerous or not, he's dead," Grayson retorted, "and I don't need you stirring things up. Stick to your pills and potions, Platt." Poirot's eyes narrowed. London, he thought. Another thread to the past. What did Dr. Platt see, and why does Grayson fear it? As the two men moved away, their voices fading into the mist, Poirot's attention shifted to a third figure, Monsieur Dubois, the elderly Frenchman, standing alone near the bow. He clutched his leather satchel, his gaunt face illuminated briefly by the flare of a match as he lit a cigarette. Poirot approached, his cane tapping softly on the deck. "Bon, Monsieur Dubois," Poirot said, his tone genial but probing. The night is restless. Nan, you find it difficult to sleep after such events." Dubois started, nearly dropping his satchel. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his accent thick, I prefer the air to the stuffiness of my cabin. This unsettles the soul." "Oui, it is most unsettling," Poirot agreed, his green eyes fixed on the satchel. "You carry that bag always, I observe. It is precious to you." Dubois's fingers tightened on the leather. "Papers, monsieur, old letters, nothing more, of no interest to anyone but me." Poirot smiled faintly. "Vraiment, letters can hold great secrets, monsieur, but I shall not press your yet." As Dubois retreated into the shadows, Poirot leaned against the railing, his mind weaving together the fragments of conversation. Mrs. Vance's secrecy, Grayson's warning to Platt, Dubois's guarded satchel all pointed to hidden alliances and buried truths, the missing jewel, the mud, the locked door, and now these whispers formed a tapestry of deception, and Poirot's little grey cells were alight with the challenge of unravelling it. The ferry's horn sounded faintly, signalling the approach of Calais. Time was short, and the killer was close. Poirot straightened, his resolve firm. "The truth," he murmured, "it hides in the whispers, but Hercule Poirot shall bring it to the light." Chapter 8. The Second Death. The crooked ferry pressed on through the dark waters of the English Channel, its timbers groaning as if burdened by the weight of the secrets it carried. Hercule Poirot had returned to the passenger lounge, his notebook open, his pen tracing the names of suspects and the threads of clues, the missing jewel, the mud from the engine room, the whispers on deck. The air was thick with unease, the passengers restless, their glances darting like shadows under the flickering brass lamps. It was nearing 2 in the morning, when a commotion erupted from the corridor. A woman's cry, not a scream, but a choked sob pierced the stillness. Poirot sprang to his feet, his cane in hand, and hurried toward the sound, the steward Tom close behind. The other passengers, roused by the noise, spilled into the corridor, their faces pale with dread. The source was cabin 4, just 2 doors from Victor Klein's. The door stood ajar, and inside, crumpled on the floor, lay Clara Beaumont, her Oberon, curls splayed across the carpet. Her eyes were wide, unseeing, and a thin cord was wound tightly around her neck, the marks of strangulation stark against her pale skin. "Soccer blue," Poirot exclaimed, kneeling beside her. He pressed a gloved finger to her wrist, confirming what her stillness already told him. "She is dead, strangled, and not long ago." Mrs. Eleanor Vance, standing frozen in the doorway, let out a strangled gasp. "Clara, God, no!" She swayed, and Leonard Grayson caught her arm, his face grim. "Another one," Grayson muttered. "What the hell's going on here?" Dr. Hugo Platt pushed through, his glasses slipping as he knelt beside Poirot. "Let me see," he said, his voice shaking. He examined Clara briefly, then shook his head. "She's gone. The cordettes, a scarf, I think. Death within the last half hour." Poirot's eyes scanned the cabin. Clara's bed was unmade, as if she'd been roused suddenly. A small handbag lay open on the table, its contents slipstick, a comb, a few coins scattered near the door. A faint scuff mark on the floor caught his attention, similar to the mud in Klein's cabin, but fresher, less defined. "Curio," he murmured. The killer moved swiftly, but not without leaving traces. He rose, addressing the gathered passengers. "This is no coincidence. 2 deaths, both violent, both on this ferry. Who was near this cabin in the last hour? Speak, I implore you." Monsieur Dubois, clutching his satchel, shook his head. "I was in my cabin, Monsieur Poirot. I heard nothing." The Marlowes, clinging to each other, spoke in unison. "We were together, in our cabin," Philip Marlowe said. "We heard a noise, like a scuffle, but thought it was the ship." Mrs. Vance, trembling, sank into a chair brought by the steward. "Clara was with me until an hour ago," she whispered. "She said she needed air, went to the deck. I didn't think." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And you, Monsieur Grayson?" Grayson shrugged, his eyes hard. "I was in the lounge, same as before. Didn't see the girl after she left with Mrs. Vance." Poirot turned to the steward. "Tom, you patrol these corridors. Did you see Mademoiselle Beaumont return to her cabin?" Tom hesitated, his face flushed up. "I saw her come back, sir, maybe 40 minutes ago. She looked upset, hurried like. I didn't think much of it." "Mercy," Poirot said, his mind racing. Clara's death, so soon after her whispered confession about Mrs. Vance, and Klein suggested she knew too much or was a threat to the killer. The scarf, the scuff mark, the timing, all were new pieces in the puzzle. He addressed the group, his voice firm. This second tragedy confirms the presence of a murderer among us, one who strikes with precision and desperation. No one is to wander alone until we reach Calais. Captain Reddick, secure all cabins except those needed for sleep. The truth, it draws near, but the killer grows bold. As the passengers dispersed, their faces etched with fear, Poirot lingered by Clara's body, his little grey cells alight. The scarf, he noted, was silk, finely made, perhaps belonging to a woman of means, like Mrs. Vance, the scuff mark hinted. At the engine room once more, and Clara's last words on deck, warning of a secret, pointed to a motive that bound the two deaths. The crooked ferry, now a floating prison, held its secrets tightly, but Poirot vowed to unravel them before the dawn. Chapter 9. The alibi puzzled. The passenger lounge of the crooked ferry was a somber stage, its brass lamps casting long shadows across the weary faces of the passengers. Hercule Poirot stood at the center, his notebook in hand, his green eyes sharp. As he surveyed the diminished group, the murders of Victor Klein and Clara Beaumont had transformed the ferry into a crucible of suspicion, and the air was thick with unspoken accusations. With Calais only hours away, Poirot knew time was his adversary as much as the killer. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice calm but commanding. "Two souls have been taken from us, and the killer walks among you. Alibis, they are the scaffolding of truth or the veil of deception. I shall examine each of yours, and the little grey cells of Hercule Poirot will find the cracks." He turned first to Mrs. Eleanor Vance, who sat rigidly, her fur stole slipping from her shoulders. "Madame Vance, you claim you were in your cabin with Mademoiselle Beaumont until she left for the deck. Yet Clara was seen returning to her cabin 40 minutes before her death. Where were you during that time?" Mrs. Vance's lips tightened. "I remained in my cabin, Monsieur Poirot. I was reading. I heard nothing until the cry." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Reading, madame, at such an hour, after a murder, most curious, and no one can confirm this." She hesitated, her eyes flickering. "No one. I was alone." Poirot made a note, then turned to Leonard Grayson, who lounged against the bar, his earlier bravado muted. "Monsieur Grayson, you were in this very lounge, you say, both at the time of Monsieur Klein's death and Mademoiselle Beaumont's, alone, each time. C'est convenable perhaps, but convenient for a killer as well." Grayson's jaw tightened. "I like a drink at night. Mr. Poirot doesn't make me a murderer. Nobody saw me leave this lounge, and I didn't see nobody else." "Precisement," Poirot said, his tone deceptively mild. "No one to confirm, no one to deny. A perfect alibi, none at all." Dr. Hugo Platt, adjusting his glasses nervously, spoke before Poirot could address him. "I was in my cabin, Monsieur Poirot, after checking on Mr. Klein's body. I took a sedative to calm my nerves. I heard nothing until the commotion over Miss Beaumont." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "A sedative, doctor. Most interesting. And yet, you were quick to examine Mademoiselle Beaumont's body. The effects of this sedative, they are selective." "None," Platt flushed. "I'm a physician. I can rouse myself when needed." Poirot turned to Monsieur Dubois, whose satchel rested on his lap like a shield. "And you, monsieur, you were in your cabin, reading, during both deaths?" Dubois nodded, his voice low. "As I said, Monsieur Poirot, I keep to myself. I heard nothing until the cries." Finally, Poirot addressed the Marlowes, who sat close, together, their hands entwined. "Monsieur and Madame Marlowe, you were on deck during Monsieur Klein's death, and in your cabin during Mademoiselle Beaumont's. A scuffle, you said, you heard, yet no one saw you on deck, and your cabin is near cabin 4. Could you have been closer to the crime?" Philip Marlowe's face hardened. "We're newlyweds, Monsieur Poirot. We were together, as we said. We heard a noise, but we didn't investigate. We're not detectives." Nan Poirot said softly, "But you are witnesses, perhaps more." He closed his notebook, his gaze sweeping the room. "Your alibis, they are like the ferry itself, crooked, unstable. Monsieur Grayson, alone in the lounge, could have slipped to cabin 6 or 4. Madame Vance, alone, after Clara left, had time to act. Dr. Platt's sedative is convenient, and Monsieur Dubois's solitude is unverified. The Marlowes, so close to the scene, hear but do not see. And then, there is the scarf silk, elegant, found around Mademoiselle Beaumont's neck. It is not hers, I suspect, but belongs to another. Mrs. Vance's hand flew to her throat, where a silk scarf was conspicuously absent. I lost mine earlier, she said quickly. It must have been taken, Raymond, Poirot said, his tone unreadable. We shall see. The mud in both cabins, the jewel, the scarf, these are pieces of a puzzle, and one of you has arranged them to deceive. But Hercule Poirot, he does not deceive easily. As the passengers exchanged uneasy glances, the ferry's engines thrummed, a reminder of the approaching dawn. Poirot's mind churned, the discrepancies in the alibis forming a pattern. The killer, he knew, was growing desperate, and the next move would be bold or fatal. Chapter 10. A glimpse of the past. The Crooked Fairy's lounge was a haven of tension, its air thick with the weight of 2 murders and the unspoken fears of the passengers. Hercule Poirot sat at a corner table, his notebook open, his green eyes glinting as he reviewed his notes. The mud, the missing jewel, the silk scarf, the fragile alibis. The ferry was nearing Calais, and the urgency of the case pressed upon him like the gathering clouds outside. Yet, a new clue was about to emerge, one that would cast light on the shadowy past of Victor Klein. Poirot's attention was drawn to Monsieur Dubois, the elderly Frenchman, who sat alone, his leather satchel resting on the table before him. The man's guarded demeanor and constant grip on the satchel had piqued Poirot's curiosity from the start. Now, as Dubois fumbled with the clasp, a single sheet of yellowed paper slipped out, fluttering to the floor. Permits moi, said, swiftly retrieving the paper before Dubois could react. His eyes flicked over the faded ink, catching a date 1929, a name Victor Klein. He handed it back with a polite smile, but not before noting the sender's initials, E.V. Monsieur Dubois. Poirot said, his tone genial but probing. This letter, it is of great age, Nan, and it mentions a name most familiar. May I ask its significance? Dubois's face paled, his hands trembling as he tucked the letter back into his satchel. It's nothing, Monsieur Poirot. An old correspondence, personal matters. It has no bearing on this tragedy, Raymond Poirot said, his mustache twitching. Yet the name Victor Klein appears, and the year 1929, the same as the cigarette case in his cabin, marked VK from EV and Curio. The same year Captain Reddick spoke of a man named Klein lost overboard. You will forgive Poirot's curiosity, but such coincidences demand explanation. Dubois's eyes darted to the door, as if seeking escape. I knew a Victor Klein, years ago, in London. A businessman, or so he claimed. We corresponded, briefly about a financial matter. It ended badly. I had not seen him since, until this ferry. Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but insistent. And this financial matter, monsieur, it involved Madame Vance. Perhaps her initials E.V. are on the cigarette case. Dubois hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Yes, Eleanor Vance was part of it. She and Klein were partners in a venture, a jewel deal, they called it. I was a minor investor. It collapsed, and there were accusations Klein vanished with the money, or so we thought. Mon Dieu, Poirot murmured, his mind racing. And now, Klein reappears, only to die, and a jewel is missing from his cabin. You did not mention this before, monsieur. Why? I didn't think it mattered, Dubois said, his voice rising. It was years ago. I thought he was dead till I saw him board this ferry. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And Mademoiselle Beaumont, did she know of this history? Dubois shook his head. I never spoke of it to anyone. Clara was too young, not part of that world. As Dubois retreated into silence, Poirot made a note in his book. The letter confirmed a link between Klein, Mrs. Vance, and Dubois, tied to a failed jewel deal in 1929. The initials E.V. pointed strongly to Eleanor Vance, and Clara's death suggested she may have stumbled upon this secret. But how did the mud from the engine room fit, and why the locked cabin? He rose, his cane tapping softly. Merci, Monsieur Dubois, your letter. It is a window to the past, and Hercule Poirot sees much through it. Remain here, if you please. Stepping into the corridor, Poirot caught sight of Mrs. Vance, her face drawn as she spoke to the steward. Her silk scarf was still missing, and her reticule, he noted, was clutched even tighter. The past, it seemed, had risen like a spectre on this ferry, and its shadow now claimed to lives. With Calais looming, Poirot knew the next hours would test his little grey cells to their limits. Chapter 11. The storm approaches. The Crooked Ferry shuddered as it battled a rising swell. The first signs of a storm gathering over the English Channel. Dark clouds loomed on the horizon, their edges lit by flashes of distant lightning, and the wind carried a sharp bite that cut through the early morning mist. Hercule Poirot stood on the deck, his overcoat flapping, his Homburg hat tilted against the gusts. The ferry was mere hours from Calais, and the mounting storm mirrored the turmoil within. A killer still at large, 2 murders unsolved, and time slipping away. Monsieur Poirot murmured, gripping the railing. The sea, she is restless, and so too are the secrets aboard this vessel. The storm, it presses Hercule Poirot to act swiftly. Inside, the passengers were confined to the lounge under Captain Reddick's orders, their faces drawn with fatigue and fear. The murders of Victor Klein and Clara Beaumont had shattered any pretense of normalcy, and Poirot's relentless questions had stirred unease. He re-entered the lounge, his cane tapping rhythmically, and surveyed the group. Mrs. Eleanor Vance, her reticule clutched like a lifeline. Leonard Grayson, nursing a whiskey with a scowl. Dr. Hugo Platt, fidgeting with his glasses. Monsieur Dubois, his satchel never far. And the Marlowes, their honeymoon shadowed by suspicion. Poirot addressed them, his voice cutting through the hum of the engines and the howl of the wind outside. Mesdames et messieurs, the ferry approaches Calais, but the storm, it is not only in the sky. A killer walks among us, and the truth must be found before we dock. I have learned much. A jewel missing, a past betrayal in 1929, a silk scarf, and mud from the engine room. Now, I ask, who among you has visited the lower decks? A murmur rippled through the group. Mrs. Vance spoke first, her voice sharp. The engine room. That's absurd, Monsieur Poirot. I have no business in such a filthy place. Grayson snorted. Same here. I stick to the bar and the deck. Coal dust ain't my style. Dr. Platt adjusted his glasses. As a physician, I've no reason to go below. My work is with the living, not machines. Monsieur Dubois clutched his satchel tighter. I am an old man, Monsieur Poirot. I do not wander into such places. The Marlowes exchanged a glance. Philip Marlowe said, We've been on deck or in our cabin, nowhere else. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Framed. Yet the mud in both cabins suggests someone ventured where passengers do not go. The engine room, it is not so distant. And its dirt, it travels. A sudden lurch of the ferry sent a glass tumbling from the bar, shattering on the floor. Mrs. Vance gasped, and Grayson cursed under his breath. The steward, Tom, appeared at the door, his face pale. Captain says the storm's worsening, sir. We'll make Calais, but it'll be rough. Mercy, Tom, Poirot said, his mind racing. The storm outside was a mirror to the chaos within. A killer desperate to cover their tracks. The mud, he reasoned, was key. Someone had access to the engine room, perhaps through a crew connection or a hidden route. And the scarf, likely Mrs. Vance's, tied her to Clara's death. But was it too obvious? He approached Mrs. Vance, his tone gentle but probing. Madame, your scarf, it is still missing. And your connection to Monsieur Klein, confirmed by Monsieur Dubois, involves a jewel deal gone wrong. Did Clara know too much? Did she threaten to expose you? Mrs. Vance's face paled, but her voice was steady. I told you, my scarf was lost, and Clara was loyal. She knew nothing of my past with Klein. You're grasping at shadows, Monsieur Poirot. Shadows, madame, often hide the truth, Poirot replied. He turned to the group. Remain here. I must speak with the captain. Again, the storm. It hastens our journey, but it will not outrun Hercule Poirot. As he stepped into the corridor, the ferry pitched violently, and a distant clap of thunder echoed. The storm was closing in, and with it, the moment of reckoning. Poirot's little grey cells churned, piecing together the mud, the scarf, the jewel, and the whispers of 1929. The killer, he knew, was feeling the pressure, and their next move would be their undoing. Chapter 12. The gathering in the lounge, the passenger lounge of the Crooked Ferry, was a cauldron of tension, its brass lamps flickering as the storm outside battered the vessel with howling winds and crashing waves. Hercule Poirot stood at the center of the room, his small, immaculate figure commanding attention despite the chaos of the night. The passengers, Mrs. Eleanor Vance, Leonard Grayson, Dr. Hugo Platt, Monsieur Dubois, and Mr. and Mrs. Philip Marlowe sat in a semicircle, their faces etched with fear and suspicion. The murders of Victor Klein and Clara Beaumont hung over them like the storm clouds, and Calais was now mere hours away. Madame et Messieurs Poirot began, his voice steady, his green eyes piercing. 2 lives have been taken on this ferry, and the killer sits among you. The time for secrets is over. Hercule Poirot has observed, listened, and reasoned, and the little grey cells, they have uncovered much. Let us now lay bare the truth. He paced slowly, his cane tapping the floor. First, the facts. Monsieur Victor Klein was struck down, in a locked cabin, a blow to the head, with mud from the engine room on the floor. A jewel, likely valuable, is missing from his valise. A cigarette case, marked VK, from EV 1929, suggests a past connection. Then, Mademoiselle Clara Beaumont, strangled with a silk scarf, Madame Vance's perhaps, in her cabin, with similar mud nearby. These crimes are linked, not by chance, but by motive. Mrs. Vance stiffened, her reticule clutched tightly. I've told you, Monsieur Poirot, my scarf was lost. I had nothing to do with this. Poirot raised a hand. Patience, Madame, let us proceed. The year 1929 is a thread that binds. Monsieur Dubois's letter revealed a failed jewel deal involving Madame Vance and Monsieur Klein. A betrayal. Where Klein vanished with the money, or so it was thought. Now, he reappears, only to die. And Clara, poor Clara, knew something of this past, did she not? Her conversation with Madame Vance on deck suggested a secret too dangerous to keep. Dubois shifted uncomfortably, his satchel on his lap. I told you, Monsieur Poirot, it was an old matter. I had no reason to kill Klein or the girl. Perhaps, Poirot said, his gaze shifting to Grayson. Monsieur Grayson, you spoke of seeing something in London, something Dr. Platt wished to keep quiet. Was it Klein? A meeting, perhaps, tied to this jewel. Grayson's jaw tightened. I ain't no snitch, Poirot. Yeah, I saw Klein in London, at a club, talking to some shady types. Didn't think much of it till now. Dr. Platt adjusted his glasses, his voice unsteady. I saw him too, briefly, at a medical conference. He was with a woman, but I didn't know her, I told Grayson, in confidence. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Interesant. And you, Monsieur and Madame Marlowe, your honeymoon is charming, but your nearness to both crime scenes is curious. A scuffle you heard, yet you did not act. Why? Philip Marlowe's face hardened. We're not detectives, Monsieur Poirot. We kept to ourselves. That's all, Poirot said, stopping before Mrs. Vance. Let us consider the scarf. It is silk, fine, like the one you wore when we boarded. Lost, you say, but found around Clara's neck, and the Madonli, someone with access to the engine room could leave. Such traces, the steward Tom, confirms no passenger should be there, yet the crew is small, and the killer is clever. He turned to the group, his voice rising. The jewel is the key. Klein carried it, or promised it, to settle an old debt. Someone knew this, and killed him for it. Clara, overhearing or knowing too much, became a threat. The locked cabin, a trick, perhaps, using a spare key or a hidden passage known to the crew. The killer is among you, and their alibis crumble under scrutiny. A crack of thunder punctuated his words, and the ferry lurched, sending a lamp crashing to the floor. Mrs. Vance gasped, Grayson swore, and the Marlowes clutched each other. Poirot's gaze swept the room, his little grey cells alight. The storm, it presses us, but the truth is near. One of you has woven a web of lies, but Hercule Poirot sees through it. Tomorrow, in Calais, the killer will be named. As the passengers exchanged wary glances, the lounge seemed to shrink under the weight of their secrets. The storm raged on, but Poirot's resolve was unshaken. The final piece of the puzzle was within reach, and he would not let it slip away. Chapter 13. The Crooked Truth. The passenger lounge of the Crooked Ferry was a tableau of tension, lit by the flickering glow of brass lamps as the storm outside reached its crescendo. The ferry was mere minutes from Calais, the distant lights of the port faintly visible through the rain-lashed windows. Hercule Poirot stood before the assembled passengers: Mrs. Eleanor Vance, Leonard Grayson, Dr. Hugo Platt, Monsieur Dubois, and Mr. and Mrs. Philip Marlowe, their faces a mosaic of fear, defiance, and resignation. 2 murders had stained the journey, and now Poirot's little grey cells were ready to unveil the truth. Mesdames et Messieurs, Poirot began, his voice steady as the ferry rocked. The Crooked Ferry has carried us through a storm of deceit, but the truth, it is clear to Hercule Poirot, Victor Klein and Clara Beaumont were murdered, and the killer sits among you. Let us unravel this tapestry of lies." He paced, his cane tapping softly. First the clues: a locked cabin, mud from the engine room, a missing jewel, a silk scarf, and a past betrayal in 1929. Monsieur Klein was killed with a single blow. His cabin locked, suggesting a clever trick. Clara was strangled with a scar from Madame Vance's. We note after, she spoke of a secret. The mud, found in both cabins, points to the engine room, a place forbidden to passengers. And the jewel, it is the heart of this crime. Poirot turned to Mrs. Vance, whose face was pale but composed. "Madame Vance, your initials EV, marked the cigarette case given to Klein in 1929. Monsieur Dubois's letter confirms you and Klein were partners in a jewel deal that failed, leaving you betrayed when Klein vanished with the funds. You recognized him on this ferry, Nan. Your argument on deck, overheard by Clara, was no mere spat." Mrs. Vance's lips trembled. "I admitted we argued, Monsieur Poirot. He taunted me about the past, but I didn't kill him." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his eyes shifting to Dr. Platt. "Doctor, you saw Klein in London, with a woman. You told Monsieur Grayson, who warned you to stay silent. Why? Because you recognized the woman as Madame Vance. We meeting about the jewel." Perhaps Platt's glasses slipped, his voice faltering. I didn't know it was her at first. I only told Grayson because he asked about Klein." Grayson snorted. "Don't drag me into this, Doc. I just wanted to know what kind of man Klein was." Poirot's gaze moved to Dubois. "Monsieur Dubois, your letter spoke of the 1929 deal, yet you claimed no recent contact with Klein. But your satchel, it holds more than papers now. The jewel, perhaps, taken from Klein's cabin." Dubois clutched his satchel, his face ashen. "You accuse me unjustly. I have no jewel." Poirot smiled faintly, then turned to the Marlowes. "And you, Monsieur and Madame Marlowe, so devoted, yet so near both crimes. Your alibis are each other. But the scuffle you heard near Clara's cabin, why did you not act, unless you had reason to stay silent?" Philip Marlowe's jaw tightened. "We've done nothing wrong, Poirot. We're just trying to start our life together." "Vraiment," Poirot said, his voice rising. "The truth, it is not so simple. The killer is clever, using the locked cabin to confuse, the scarf to point to Madame Vance, the mud to suggest a crewman. But the jewel is the key. Klein carried it, intending to sell or return it, settling old debts. Clara, overhearing Madame Vance's anger, became a threat. The killer acted twice, but made one mistake. The mud." He paused, his eyes locking on Dr. Platt. "Dr. You claimed a sedative kept you in your cabin, yet you were quick to examine both bodies. The mud in both cabins matches the engine room, where you, as a physician, might have gone to fetch supplies, bandages, perhaps, stored below. And the scarf, you took it from Madame Vance's cabin, Nan, to cast suspicion on her." Platt's face drained of color. "That's preposterous. I'm a doctor, not a murderer." "Nan," Poirot said, his voice like steel. "You knew Klein from London, where he blackmailed you over a medical scandal, a patient's death, perhaps, that you covered up. He demanded the jewel as payment. You killed him in his cabin, using a spare key from the steward's ring, which you accessed during your examination. The mud betrayed you, trailing from the engine room. Clara, suspecting you after seeing you near Klein's cabin, was silenced with the scarf." A gasp rippled through the lounge. Platt stood, trembling. "You have no proof." "Au contraire," Poirot said, producing a small vial from his pocket. "This, found in your cabin, contains traces of engine room coal dust. You dropped it there, doctor, when you retrieved the murder weapon, a heavy medical instrument, hidden now, but soon to be found." Platt collapsed into his chair, his glasses falling to the floor. He would have ruined me," he whispered. "And the girl, she saw me leave Klein's cabin. I had no choice." Mrs. Vance gasped, and Grayson swore softly. Poirot nodded, his expression somber. "The jewel, doctor, where is it?" Platt's voice was hollow. "In my bag, hidden in a bandage roll." Poirot turned to the steward. "Tom, fetch the captain. Dr. Platt will be detained until we reach Calais." As the passengers sat in stunned silence, the ferry's horn sounded, signaling the approach to port. The storm had broken, and the truth, like the dawn, had emerged. Poirot's little grey cells had triumphed, but the cost was heavy, and the crooked ferry would carry its tale of tragedy long after it docked. Chapter 14. The ferry docks. The crooked ferry glided into the port of Calais as the first light of dawn pierced the storm's lingering clouds, casting a pale glow over the weary vessel. The rain had softened to a drizzle, and the air was heavy with the scent of salt and coal. Hercule Poirot stood on the deck, his overcoat buttoned tightly, his Homburg hat tilted against the breeze. The case was solved, the killer unmasked, but the weight of 2 lives lost lingered in his orderly mind. Inside the lounge, Dr. Hugo Platt sat under the watchful eye of Captain Reddick and the steward, Tom, his hands bound with a length of rope. The jeweler, glittering emerald the size of a pigeon's egg, had been recovered from his medical bag, wrapped in a bandage as Poirot had deduced. The passengers, now subdued, gathered their belongings, their faces reflecting relief, guilt, and lingering shock. Poirot re-entered the lounge, his cane tapping softly, and addressed the group one final time. Mesdames et messieurs, the crooked ferry has carried us through a storm of deception, but the truth, it has prevailed. Dr. Platt, driven by blackmail and fear, took the lives of Monsieur Victor Klein and Mademoiselle Clara Beaumont. The jewel, the key to his motive, is now secured, and justice will follow in Calais. Mrs. Eleanor Vance, her reticule finally relaxed in her lap, spoke softly. Monsieur Poirot, I should have told you more. Klein's betrayal in 1929 ruined me financially. When I saw him, I was angry, but I swear I didn't kill him. Poirot nodded, his expression gentle. Oui, madame, your silence protected you, but it endangered others. Clara, poor Clara, paid the price for overhearing your anger. Yet, you are not the killer. Leonard Grayson, his bravado returning, clapped his hands. Well, damn Poirot, you're a genius. Caught the dock red-handed. That emerald's a beauty shame. It caused so much trouble. Monsieur Grayson, Poirot said sharply, the jewel is no beauty when it costs lives. Its value is tainted by greed. Monsieur Dubois, his satchel now open, revealing only papers, sighed. I kept my silence too, Monsieur Poirot. I feared Klein had come to drag up the past. I was wrong to hide it. The Marlowes, clinging to each other, offered a quiet nod. We're just glad it's over, Philip Marlowe said. This was no honeymoon to remember. Poirot's mustache twitched. Nan, but you are young, and life, it continues. Learn from this, and cherish the truth. Captain Reddick approached, his weathered face grim. Monsieur Poirot, the authorities are waiting at the dock. They'll take Platt into custody. I never thought my ferry would see such a thing. Capitaine Poirot said, the crooked ferry, it is but a stage. The human heart, it is where the true drama plays out. As the passengers disembarked, Platt was led away by French gendarmes, his head bowed. The emerald, secured in a police case, gleamed briefly in the dawn, light before vanishing into an officer's pocket. Poirot watched from the gangplank, his green eyes reflective. He turned to the sea, the storm now a memory. Mon Dieu, he murmured, the little grey cells, they have worked hard this night. The locked cabin, the mud, the scarf, the pieces of a puzzle that spoke of greed and fear. Hercule Poirot has brought order, but the cost, it is always heavy. With a final glance at the crooked ferry, its name still peeling in gold, Poirot stepped onto the dock, his mind already turning to the next challenge. The ferry would sail again, but its tale of death would linger, a cautionary whisper on the waves.